Early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Because over the last 3 years as President of the United States, I have kept my commitments to the state of Israel. At every crucial juncture, at every fork in the road, we have been there for Israel every single time.
Winners write the history. Winners publish the history. Winners own the history. Most of us know nothing of what really happened in World War II. Most of us know only what the winners want us to know about that so-called good war. What happened to the German people both during and after the war remains to this day the darkest and best kept secret in world history. And now, this secret is a secret no more.
Ja, das deutsche Volk war ja damals eine Demokratie vor uns. Und es ist ausgeplündert und ausgeprägt worden. Nein, was heißt für die internationalen Hyänen Demokratie oder autoritärer Staat? Das interessiert die gar nicht. Es interessiert nur eines. Ist jemand bereit, sich ausblüten zu lassen? Ja oder nein? Ist jemand dumm genug? Ist Stillheit? Ja oder nein? Und wenn eine Demokratie dumm genug ist, dann ist Stillheit. arbeiten, dann ist sie gut. Und wenn ein autoritärer Staat erklärt, wir plündern unser Volk innen und außen, dann ist das schlecht. In diesen Ländern regieren hauptsächlich das Kapital. Sie reden von der Freiheit der Presse. In Wirklichkeit hat jede dieser Zeitungen einen Herrn. Und dieser Herr ist in jedem Fall der Geldgeber. Diese Presse moduliert nun die öffentliche Meinung. Diese Parteien unterscheiden sich so wenig voneinander, als sich früher bei uns von den anderen unterschieden haben. Sie kennen ja die alten Parteien. Das war immer eines und dasselbe. Nun müsste man doch meinen, dass vor allem in diesen Ländern der Freiheit und des Reichtums ein unerhörtes Wohlleben für das Volk bestehen müsste. Das ist aber umgekehrt.
It is untrue that I or anybody else in Germany thought of war in 1939. It was desired and instigated exclusively by those international statesmen who were either of Jewish origin or working for Jewish interests. I have made so many offers for the reduction and elimination of armaments, which posterity cannot explain away for all eternity, that the responsibility for the outbreak of this war cannot rest on me.
In 1918, Germany lost to World War I. Although no enemy soldiers crossed German borders, there were feelings of treason and humiliation. The German Empire collapsed. Enormous reparations and sanctions followed. The country had severe economical problems, lack of food. The solution: Bolshevik activists took advantage of the situation and radicalized the masses. At the end of 1918, uprisings broke out in Berlin and other German cities. Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg were ideological leaders of the Red Revolution in Germany. Rosa Luxemburg, Jewish Marxist from Poland. Karl Liebknecht, Jewish co-founder of the Communist Party of Germany. Young A. Hitler lived in these times in Munich, Bavaria, where revolution also broke out. November 7, 1918, Red Radicals led by Kurt Eisner declared Bavaria a Soviet republic. All leaders of the Bavarian Bolshevik Revolution of 1918-1919 were Jewish. Kurt Eisner, Jew, leader of the Bavarian Red Revolution and first president of the Bolshevik regime. Ernst Scholler, Jew, second president of the Bolshevik Republic. Agent Levine, Jew, fanatical communist, established the Bavarian Red Army and unleashed a Red Terror. Gustav Lother, Jewish anarchist, main ideological leader. Young Adolf Hitler was a witness to these historical events. He witnessed Red Guards, many of whom were foreigners, mostly Russian. He saw barricades, war, and blood in the heart of German cities. He saw Red soldiers and Jewish Bolshevik agitators hidden behind them. He saw the destruction caused by the Civil War. And finally, he saw National Freight Corps troops smash the Bolsheviks and restore peace in Germany. Bolshevik Revolution also broke out in Hungary in 1919. Like in Bavaria, all leaders of the Hungarian Revolution were Jewish. Russia's Soviet Red Army began attacking Western countries in support of revolutions in the West. The Soviet Red Army was established by Jewish communist Leon Trotsky, Leon Bronstein, and he commanded it personally. In 1919, Trotsky and his Bolsheviks attacked Poland to support Red Revolution in Germany. But they were ultimately crushed by Polish nationalists. Aggressive Bolshevism was a real danger for the whole of Europe, and nearly all the ideological leaders of Bolshevism and Marxism were Jewish. Lenin's Jewish roots confirmed. This was the situation after World War I. It was in such an atmosphere Hitler and other Nazis formed their principles and ideals.
It is thus not surprising that as the 20th century dawns, we find Jews turning their attentions to the overthrow of one of the last monarchies still opposing Jewish advancement, the Romanov dynasty of Russia. It is well known that the Jews had long hoped to overthrow the Tsar. It was natural then that Jewish philosophers such as Moses Hess and Karl Marx should contrive a philosophy that could make such overthrow possible. It was also natural that international Jewish bankers of New York, London, and Hamburg should finance it. The U.S. State Department, in its 3-volume report on the origins of communism in Russia, published in 1931, reveals how Jewish-controlled German banks under the leadership of Max Warburg conspired as early as 1914 to send large payments to Lenin, Trotsky, and others in their attempts to bring down the Tsar. As part of this conspiracy, Jacob Schiff, head of the New York Jewish banking house of Kuhn Loeb, invested at least $20 million, which would be close to $1 billion today, toward the establishment of Bolshevism in Russia. In its article on socialism, the Jewish Encyclopedia, published in 1905, freely admits that Jews in Russia were ripe for revolution. In Russia, socialism, has become a movement of the Jewish masses. The later Encyclopedia Judaica tells us the communist movement and ideology played an important part in Jewish life, particularly in the 1920s and 1930s, and during and after World War II. The Judaica, in fact, presents an extensive list of the most powerful Jewish leaders of Bolshevism, which included Trotsky, Sverdlov, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Litvinov, Kaganovich, and many others. The Judaica also tells us just how many Jews filled the communist ranks. It says anti-Semitism drove the bulk of Russian Jewish youth into the ranks of the Bolshevik regime. When the white Russian patriots heroically attempted to regain their freedom from the Jews, the Judaica says compact Jewish masses were utilized by the Bolsheviks to suppress such counter-revolution. Clearly, Jews and native Russians were engaged in a death struggle over the destiny of Russia. A rare photo shows the First People's Commissariat. From left to right are Uritsky, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Sverdlov, and Kaganovich, all Jewish. In 1918, intelligence services of the Western powers were buzzing with reports that communism was an international conspiracy fomented by atheistic Jews. British, Dutch, American, and other intelligence reports confirmed that Jews filled the Bolshevik ranks and that as much as 75% of all Soviet commissars were Jewish. In the Illustrated Sunday Herald of February 8, 1920, Sir Winston Churchill commented on what had almost become public knowledge. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one.
It is often said that it was Jews who orchestrated the Russian Revolution that resulted in the communist government, and as US government documents looking at this period are said to prove. At the time, Jews openly bragged about this fact, how they arrested the Tsar, murdered his wife, murdered his daughters, murdered his crippled son, murdered all his relatives, and then proceeded to murder millions of other innocent Russians. Some argue that the Jewish media barons ignored these atrocities, since the perpetrators of these crimes were in fact mostly Jewish. In the early days of the Soviet Union, when the bloodletting reached its climax, Lazar Kaganovich was the Jewish head of the KGB and was well known for his purges of those who opposed Jewish control. It is argued that Stalin, whose second wife was Kaganovich's sister, was a mere figurehead. Some believe that the numerous Jews below Stalin in all significant positions ran the show. As proof, some point out that many of the churches were burnt to the ground, while the synagogues were left standing. Many priests were forced to sweep the streets and others were murdered. The Jewish Soviet leaders held rabbis in high esteem, and those people who dared to criticize the Jewish supremacy were mercilessly murdered as anti-Semitism became a crime punishable by death in the Soviet Union. throughout all this, as you would expect, people just kept on disappearing. It is said that the Jewish propagandists there worked to conceal these facts as best they could.
The German army suffered terribly during the First World War, and the German nation also suffered terribly, especially after the war. The crippling sanctions enacted by the victors with the Treaty of Versailles threw the country into serious depression. There was chaos on the streets and anarchy in the air. Communists seized many cities, including Berlin. While the great wealth of the nation was bled away by outrageous war reparations or sucked out by unscrupulous politicians, the average German was impoverished. Inflation and unemployment soon followed and quickly destroyed all hope, all confidence, all morality. German cities were awash in pornography and prostitution, with even starving children being bought and sold like sex toys. Crime was rampant. Drunkenness and drug addiction were widespread. Suicide rates soared. The situation seemed hopeless. And then things changed, dramatically. Soon after the National Socialists were elected, the German economy sprang to life. Unemployment was erased. Building boomed. Great projects began. Confidence burst to life anew. After years of hunger, hardship, shame, and degradation, Germany became a happy, hopeful nation again. Germany's transformation from squalor and misery to a world superpower was so incredible that the 1938 Time magazine named Adolf Hitler Man of the Year. To many, it seemed as if a new cultural, economic, and political renaissance for all of Europe was at hand. But others throughout the world, envious, powerful, but above all fearful, now worked night and day to take Germany down. The Second World War was the most deadly and destructive war in history. For 6 long years, the unequal struggle pitting Germany against the world continued, with first one side, then the other on top. But at last, overwhelmed, Germany was once more defeated. This time, however, the Reich was to be punished not with mere reparations, nor loss of land, nor with simple decadence and despair. No. On this occasion, Germany was to be subjected to pure hatred. Hatred of the most vicious, evil, and depraved kind imaginable. Millions upon millions of Germans, many of whom had nothing to do with the war, were systematically raped, tortured, slaughtered, and all in the most sadistic and sickening ways imaginable. What happened to Germany and its people during and after World War II has remained the darkest and best kept secret in world history.
When Mr. H assumed power in 1933, there were 7 million unemployed Germans, the highest per capita unemployment rate in Europe at the time. In only his first year in office, an unprecedented 3,374,000 were held back to work. Mr. H's brilliant and innovative ideas included building motorways the length and breadth of the country, with housing units provided for workers. The workers' families would then eagerly spend the newly earned wages, contributing to a fast-growing economy. Priority was given to the health and fitness of the nation, especially the youth. Free healthcare and generous financial support were provided for expectant mothers. The world's first anti-smoking campaigns are also introduced. In addition, it was now government policy to protect the environment and wildlife. Crime was virtually eliminated, with city streets made safe to walk again. Workers subsidized by the government would take holidays abroad. Mr. H is the first in Europe to introduce the 40-hour workweek with extra pay for overtime. Factories are now required to provide workers with restrooms and cafeteria. The NSDAP leadership looked upon the charging of interest on loans as immoral, and by forcing banks to abolish the practice of usury, millions were freed from the slavery of debt. It was a spectacular financial recovery not witnessed before or since, and often referred to as the greatest economic miracle of all time. Meanwhile, most Western countries were still mired in the Great Depression.
when you ask what have the Germans done to the Jews, you must always ask what have done the Jews to the Germans. Since 1850, when the Jews got all the political rights in Germany, the German Reich, they have done three things which are really dramatic. Number one, they were a small minority of 2% of the population. At the time when Hitler came to power, 500,000 within 60 million German people. 500,000 among 60 million. They were a small minority. This small minority managed to control about 50% of the media, to give about 70% of all judges, to have a tremendous influence in movie and in theater and in literature. They were overrepresented. This is one thing. They were absolutely overrepresented, as today in England, in France, and in the United States. Second, Jews were at the origin of a lot of catastrophic financial bank crashes in Germany between 1870 and 1920. In that time, they made a lot of crashes which have, this is all documented. It's not Nazi propaganda or anti-Semitic or Arab propaganda. It's a lot of books have been published, even by Jewish Germans, about this problem. They have millions of German fathers have lost their incomes, their fortune, their savings because of these Jewish gangsters, bank gangsters and speculation people. Then the third point, which was psychologically the most dangerous of all, they have introduced into German art and culture and theater and movie decadence, immorality. The first homosexual theaters, plays, were made in Berlin in the 1920s. The first adultery theater plays were made in the 1880s and 1890s, 100 years ago, by Jewish authors. Adultery, then sexual perversions of all sorts, sadism, masochism, a lot of homosexuality, all these things, and then decadent art, you know, an art which is absolutely ridiculous, so-called modern art. It was all pushed by Jewish intellectuals, and this created among the German people a big revolt. And they wrote books ridiculing Christianity, ridiculing Jesus, and there were furious reactions in Germany. And this is why Adolf Hitler came to power. And you see, then Hitler in 2 years, from 33 to 35, he brought 6 million unemployed Germans back into their jobs. He created 6 million jobs. It's incredible.
The mid-1930s were the halcyon years of Hitler's Germany. Germany was at peace, her prosperity restored, her national pride recovered. To those prepared to ignore or justify the police state, it seemed a beautiful Germany. A host of distinguished foreign visitors, many with impeccable democratic credentials, came to call on the Führer at his mountain retreat, the Berghof. Among them was the former British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. With LG was his secretary, Albert Sylvester.
Hitler ran down the flight of stairs to welcome LG as he got out of his car, shook hands with him most warmly, and conducted us into the inside of the Berghof. This massive room, the only light of which came from a massive window, which was terrific. I'd never seen such a window. Lloyd George said, "You have done great things for Germany. You have restored her honor."
On the morning of the 12th of March 1938, German soldiers crossed the border into neighboring Austria. They were greeted not with bullets and guns, but with roses and carnations. So much so that the action became known as the Blumenkrieg, the War of Flowers. Most of the Austrian people envying what they saw as the economic success and prestige that Hitler had brought to Germany, now welcomed their German neighbors.
He crossed the border near his birthplace at Braunau. The people rejoiced at the Anschluss, which they saw as the fulfillment of an old dream of the German nation, an emphatic display of self-determination, a right denied to the German people under the Versailles Treaty, whose terms were generally considered unjust. Visibly moved, he entered Vienna, and the city that had seen his early failures now gave him a hero's reception. Homage was being paid to the man who had achieved the unification of the German people.
1938, Czechoslovakia. In 1919, the Allies at Versailles formed a new country called Czechoslovakia. The population will now consist of 6.7 million Czechs, 3.1 million Germans, 2.0 million Slovaks, 700,000 Hungarians, 460,000 Ukrainians. With Czech violence against ethnic German minorities on the rise, Sudeten Germans are forced to call for the reunification with Germany. Czech President Edvard Beneš will instead order martial law imposed on the Sudeten provinces, forcing a furious Adolf Hitler to demand their return. September 1938. I have put forward an offer to Herr Beneš, an offer that is nothing other than the realization of his promises. The decision is his now, be it war or peace. He can either accept my offer and give the Germans their freedom, or we Germans will go get it ourselves. 28 September 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain departs for Germany. The Munich Peace Conference.
A wave of relief and gratitude for the Führer swept Germany. His iron nerve had freed the Germans in Czechoslovakia and yet averted war.
You secured us victory. Now you secured us peace. In 1939, the Polish conflict. Problems had arisen in Poland over access to German territory of East Prussia and the coastal city of Danzig. Mr. H on several occasions presented proposals to try and resolve both situations peaceably, but the Poles refused to seriously negotiate. Now in Poland, just as in Czechoslovakia, the safety of ethnic Germans was again becoming a concern for Mr. H.
Until 1934, conflicts between Germany and Poland smoldered. Danzig, next to East Prussia, had been completely cut off from the right. Warsaw continued to try to wrest total control over the strategically important harbor city. In West Prussia, the situation was similar. East Prussia was now completely cut off from the German Reich. Bolstered by English and French guarantees of war support, Poland has no further incentive to negotiate in good faith with Germany, and in the meantime, in Warsaw, maps are suddenly starting to circulate which contain a new western Polish border extending to just west of Berlin. All across Poland, the so-called pogroms against the minorities begin. Night after night, Polish border officials shot at the fleeing Germans. Shortly before the official outbreak of war, there were already 80,000 ethnic Germans in refugee camps in both Danzig and the German Reich. The misery of the minority Germans in Poland had now developed the third and most pressing reason that would lead to the outbreak of war.
Hitler now has a problem that Britain and France will declare war on them. At this point, Poland is actually committing pretty bad atrocities against the German minority in West Prussia, in the German part of Poland at that time. And so given that Poles are committing atrocities against the German minority in Poland, Hitler is now at a very tough situation. Basically, it's like, all right, if I don't declare war on Poland, if I don't go in and help these Germans out, well, then the German minority is just going to keep getting slaughtered. And it's not an insignificant amount of Germans in that area who were being killed. I mean, it was pretty bad what was going on, what the Poles were doing in that area. And so he was basically saying, well, if we don't go in, then those Germans are just going to keep getting slaughtered. If we go in, we're going to find ourselves at war with Poland, France, and Britain, and possibly the Soviet Union.
But in a move of brilliant cunning, he astonished the world in the summer of 1939 by doing a deal with Stalin. With Stalin on his side, Hitler was sure nobody else would interfere when he attacked the Poles.
Within 2 days, the issues involving the human rights of German minorities, as well as the disputes over Danzig and isolated East Prussia, would turn into World War II. From the beginning, the civilian population feels the impact of the invasion. As casualties mount, Polish civilians, with the full support of their military, hunt down any Germans still in Poland. Following the invasion, there is a wave of house searches. Ethnic Germans are beaten and raped, with at least 5,000 murdered. The massacres, especially in the city of Bromberg, will be hidden from the history books. They will eventually emerge as one of the most heinous of crimes to be inflicted upon a civilian population. Danzig, 16 September 1939. And Adolf says, as a soldier in the World War who only fought in the West, I never had the opportunity to witness such deeds. The thousands of slaughtered of Volksgenossen, the brutally butchered women and children, the countless German soldiers and officers who fell wounded in the hands of the enemy and who were massacred and bestially mutilated within their eyes gouged out. And worse yet, the Polish government has openly admitted this in a radio broadcast. The Luftwaffe soldiers that were forced to parachute were to be killed in a cowardly fashion. On 17 September 1939, Stalin invades Poland and claims the Eastern Territory as agreed. Meanwhile, Mr. H, on 3 separate occasions, offers the opportunity of unconditional surrender to the Polish commander in Warsaw. Poland refuses all ultimatum, and the German assault begins. Warsaw capitulates in just 24 hours at the cost of 40,000 dead or injured. The war with Poland lasts just 29 days.
During World War II, Germany was subjected to an unrelenting assault from the sky. The Americans and British called it carpet bombing, saturation bombing, or unrestricted bombing. However, the German women and children who suffered through this nightmare called it by a simpler, more accurate name: terror bombing. The terror campaign was no accident. It was the secret plan of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris to unleash the full power of the Royal Air Force against German civilians, to inflict as much damage, to destroy as many homes, and to kill as many men, women, and children as possible.
German cities will be subjected to an ordeal, the like of which has never been experienced by our country. Continuity, severity, or magnitude. To achieve this end, there are no lengths of violence to which we will not go.
Churchill's violence was on full display during the night of July 24, 1943. To the residents of Hamburg, a city of over 1 million souls, The raid seemed initially like a standard bombing run. But soon, hundreds of enemy aircraft began raining down tons upon tons of high explosives on the very heart of Hamburg. Schools, churches, hospitals, homes, ancient art and architecture, all were blown to bits. The onslaught increased in fury with each succeeding wave of bombers, building minute by minute into a fiery, devastating crescendo. And then the planes suddenly disappeared. The skies were clear again, and all above was silent. When the stunned survivors re-emerged from their cellars later that night, they saw that their once beautiful city was now a smoldering ruin. The following day, as firefighters from throughout northern Germany battled the blaze, Allied bombers suddenly appeared over Hamburg again. As planned, the Americans surprised not only the emergency workers, but columns of fleeing refugees as well. Thousands perished. The next night, RAF bombers returned. In addition to the normal payload of high explosives, the British sent down tons of phosphorus bombs to accelerate the fires. The resulting conflagration ignited a firestorm. Hurricane-force winds created by the intense heat uprooted trees, ripped roofs from buildings, and sucked screaming victims into the raging inferno. Some who escaped the 150-mile-per-hour winds in the streets became mired in melting asphalt and quickly burst into flames. Those who had thrown themselves into the city's canals died of thermal radiation. Then, as they floated on the water's surface, they too ignited. In the center of the firestorm, temperatures reached 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. When the great mass of flames joined, they rose into a column 3 miles high. The attacks against Hamburg continued unabated for another week. Soon, there was nothing left to destroy. Appropriately dubbed by the Allies as Operation Gomorrah, the raids had been a cold and calculated attempt to scorch Hamburg and its people from the face of the earth. The plan succeeded. With 13 square miles of total destruction, the 750,000 homeless, with an estimated 60 to 100,000 dead, mostly women and children, Hamburg, for all intents and purposes, had ceased to exist. It was now clear to all that the Allied air war against Germany had become a war of massacre and terror. The pattern was repeated time and again across Germany. Hamburg, Berlin, Nuremberg, Darmstadt, Cologne, Stuttgart, Würzburg, Munich. All German cities suffered the same. After first blasting a town to splinters, the Allied bombers quickly returned in the hope of catching survivors and rescuers in the open and igniting with firebombs all that remained. When the roaring bombers released their lethal cargo, a veritable rain of fire descended upon a targeted town. The thousands of small fires would join together to form one huge blaze, creating an intense vortex of wind and flames. When would-be rescuers finally broke through to buried bunkers, they often found scenes of unimaginable horror. In cellars suffering direct hits, walls were awash in blood, with bone, brains, and body parts splattered everywhere. Rescuers who entered some bunkers found floors covered in up to a foot of greasy fat. The victims rendered down into a dark liquid. When word first filtered through to the outside world of the butchery being visited upon the women and children of Germany by the Royal Air Force, critics of these war crimes spoke out.
The ruthless mass bombing of congested cities is as great a threat to the integrity of the human spirit as anything which has yet occurred on this planet. There is no military or political advantage which can justify this blasphemy.
To just fly over it without opposition felt like murder. I felt it was a cowardly war.
Working in tandem with the terror bombing of German cities was the targets of opportunity policy upon the countryside. Under this order, anything moving in the Reich was fair game for Allied fighter planes. Ships, trucks, cars, trains, ambulances, women shopping on bicycles, farmers in fields, animals in pastures, even children in schoolyards were targets of Allied aircraft. In a flagrant attempt to widen the war, American bombers even attacked Zurich, Basel, and other targets in neutral Switzerland. Additionally, Winston Churchill made plans to saturate German cities with poison gas and kill those women and children yet alive amid the rubble. When advisors pointed out that Adolf Hitler might reply in kind with his own stockpiles of chemical weapons, the murderous plan was shelved. Meanwhile, the hell raining from the clouds mirrored an ongoing hell rising from the mud. As Germans soon came to realize, the Allied powers sought not only the physical destruction of Germany, but the spiritual massacre of the nation as well. Fueling the flames of hate was the Jewish propagandist Ilya Ehrenberg. One of the most influential men in the Soviet Union, Ehrenberg made sure his message of evil reached every soldier in the Red Army by ordering that leaflets be dropped from airplanes onto the front lines.
Kill them all, men, old men, children, and the women, after you have amused yourself with them. Kill. Nothing in Germany is guiltless, neither the living nor the yet unborn. Break the racial pride of the German woman. Take her as your legitimate booty. Kill, you brave soldiers of the victorious Soviet Army.
Soon, as the Red Army forced the Wehrmacht back in the east, millions of German civilians suffered the same ghastly fate as the victims of Nemmersdorf. It was the second wave of soldiers who delivered hell on earth. In numerous instances, before troops pushed on, they turned to the helpless civilians and warned,
"The Mongols are coming. Very bad men. To go quick, go quick."
Terrified by the news, many Germans did attempt to flee. Most, however, found themselves trapped. Other than destroy liquor and hide young girls, most could only watch the clock and pray that their worst fears were unfounded. After a wait of sometimes days, but normally hours, the dreaded second wave arrived. Composed largely of Mongols and other Asians, as well as convicts, these men who formed the second wave of troops were regarded, even by their own comrades, as utterly merciless. Leading this group were the communist commissars, the fanatical political officers composed almost exclusively of Jews. These hate-filled individuals acted as the more than willing orchestrators of the horrors that befell the German people. Of all the methods used to express its hatred, the Red Army said it best with rape.
For the victors, American generals became American presidents. British prime ministers became British knights. Allied soldiers became the greatest generation. And the winning side claimed complete and utter control over the history of World War II. Not surprisingly, in the winner's expert hands, the evil crime that was World War II was quickly transformed into the crusade in Europe, the war to end evil, and simply the good war. Year after year, decade after decade, a mountain of movies, TV shows, articles, books are released with the sole intent of heaping crime and guilt on the heads of the victims. At the same time, the victors have elevated themselves to paragons of virtue by hiding the very real crimes they committed both during and after the war. Anyone who can say that the actions of the Allies were justified hopefully has never witnessed a screaming child running like a living torch through a flaming street, never watched as a man drank his own urine to stay alive, even as a river ran just beyond the prison fence, never heard the animal shrieks of the tortured as their genitals are mutilated, or the groans of a bleeding woman begging for a bullet while the line awaiting its turn grows longer. Hopefully these people have never seen such things, for only then one can understand how they might parrot over and over again the standard refrain, "They got exactly what they deserved," and never lose a moment's sleep. Still, if there is one central truth that was born of World War II, it is that clearly there is no such thing as a good war. Those who say differently are either those who profit politically or financially from war, or those who have never witnessed war up close in all its horror.
After 6 years of struggle, which in spite of all reverses will go down in history as the most glorious and most courageous manifestation of a people's will to live, I cannot separate myself from the city, which is the capital of this Reich. Because our forces are too few to permit any further resistance against the enemy's assaults, I desire to share the fate that millions of others have taken upon themselves, and that I shall remain in this city. Furthermore, I do not want to fall into the hands of enemies who, for the delectation of the hate-riddled masses, require a new spectacle promoted by the Jews. I have therefore resolved to remain in Berlin, once there to choose death of my own will at the very moment when, as I believe, the seat of the Führer and Chancellor can no longer be defended.
Take you to the clinic if you want a taste. Come at me and you will be replaced. They won't find a trace of